a key to
Count down for me. 10, 9, I want to hear it.
7, 6, 5.
Hey, good morning. Welcome to Sunday Lyceum here at Cassadaga. I'm the Reverend Gregory Kent. I'm very honored to be here with you this morning, and those of you who are physically, thank you for being here. Those who are live streaming with us, we're very appreciative that you're with us. And of course, those who are spiritually with us, you're always welcome. So we've been discussing Intro to Modern Spiritualism, and what we've talked about so far up to this point is we started with the Hydesville events in 1848. Hydesville, New York, the Fox family had moved into a temporary cottage in Hydesville. Their cottage was being built, so they kind of rented a property. And as soon as they moved in, they started having the wrappings. And March of the following year is when they communicated with the spirit, and they found out it was a murdered peddler by the name of Charles Rosna. So the Fox sisters then started going and demonstrating the spirit wrappings at people's homes, auditoriums, all around the Rochester, New York area. And about that time, the oldest sister, Leah, got involved, and she was kind of like playing the role of the agent. She would schedule the wrapping. She would schedule the seances for the sisters to demonstrate. So it was kind of very well organized three sisters. So by 1851, we talked about a lot of home circles started to develop, and the movement for spiritualism started to build. The momentum was building. We talked about the Fox sisters going over to England and demonstrating over there. Then we brought us up to 1864 with the first Spiritualist Convention, which lasted for 9 years, and then it faded out. More mediums were developing and demonstrating. Townships around this time started passing ordinances banning the public demonstration of spirit communication. Sometimes they called it witchcraft, they called it fortune telling. So they started banning it. And in order to protect the mediums, it was decided to form again the organization. In 1893, it formed once again, corresponding with the Chicago's World's Fair and the delegates to the world's religion in Chicago. So in 1893, we incorporated as a religion, and it was mainly to protect the workers of the church from being arrested or harassed. We talked about the national organization starting, National Spiritualist Association of the United States of America, changing its name in the 1920s to the National Spiritualist Association, changing it again in 1953 to the National Spiritualist Association of Churches. Bringing us up to 1904, just hitting the events as they go along. 1904 was when the cellar collapsed at the Hydesville cottage, revealing the skeleton of the murdered peddler. 1916, the cottage was moved to Lilydale, New York. In 1993, it burned down. So the cottage had a nice 100+ year history running prior to it burning down. One of the questions last week was spiritualism in the UK. The first spiritualist church in the UK opened in 1853. The Spiritualist National Union was incorporated in 1901. The National Spiritualist Association of Churches also went into Europe, and then they organized as an organization in 1901. But what I didn't know was they didn't become a recognized religion until 1951. Didn't know that. The movement was not accepted as a religion until 1951 through an act of parliament with the help of Winston Churchill. So they actually had to go through an act of, what we would call an act of Congress, an act of parliament, to become a recognized religion. Today, the Spiritualist National Union has unified over 340 spiritualist churches, 340 spiritualist churches, 2,700 members, and all 340 churches comprise 11,000 spiritualists, over 11,000 spiritualists. Can you imagine being part of an organization with 340 churches? It would certainly help our pastor out, wouldn't it, having that many spiritualist churches to ask people to come and work? You would like that, Reverend Gates?
There's always a volunteer in the house.
We appreciate that. So, once the mediums were meeting, the home circles were building, then what? Well, the next chapter of this is to talk about the camps. They would start to outgrow, obviously, the homes or the whatever meeting places they were happened to be at, and so they developed camps. They established the camps, and the first spiritualist camp meeting to be held, according to my research, was Pierpont Grove, Malden, Massachusetts in 1866. The first permanent camp established was in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Cape Cod Camp in 1867. Now, a lot of these camps were seasonal. They were during the summer. Up north, you don't want to do anything during the winter months, obviously. So their camps were during the summer. Now, when I talk about Cassadaga, back in the day, that was the northern camps wanting a place to come during the winter months. And Florida seemed to be the obvious choice, but I'll get to that in a moment. So, when the camps opened, most of it were tents until they could build their buildings. They were tents. So you'd have a row of tents where people would stay. Then you'd have the bigger tent where they would hold their services. And they did that for a number of years until they could raise the funds to build an auditorium like we have down here. This is our second auditorium, I believe. So what would it cost? Right now, if you were to go into Lilydale Camp, current rate's $15 to come through the front gate. $18 if it was a 2-day event. Guess what it was back in the 1800s to get through the gate? And you could stay all day. A dime. A dime. We're going to charge you a dime to come through. You know, we laugh now. Phone calls used to be a dime on the machines when I was younger. Good morning, sir. How are you? So it was a dime to get in, and it allowed you to stay all day. Now it's $15 to come in. So I want to talk about one of the largest spiritualist camps, which is Lilydale, New York. When looking up about Lilydale, I've been to Lilydale. It's located outside of Pomfret, New York. It's on Lake Cassadaga. And right outside of it is Jamestown. Jamestown, you know what Jamestown's claim to fame is now? Right down the road. It's where Lucille Ball was born, and Lucille Ball was buried, and the Lucille Ball Museum. So it's about 20 minutes down the road. But it was incorporated in 1879 as the Cassadaga Lake Free Association. It was a farm. The farmhouse is still across the street. It's now been converted into a hotel, a 2-story hotel. The people who lived there allowed the spiritualists to come onto their property, put up their tents, and hold their summer camp. Eventually, the owners of the property sold it or gave it to the associations so they could build their camp. It was a camp meeting for spiritualists and free thinkers. Now, when I started going to Lilydale, when you enter into the camp, right across the street are twin Victorian houses. They're not the huge ornate Victorian homes, but what I always got a kick out of is the first house had a banner across the balcony that said, Susan B. Anthony slept here. You know, humorous but true. Susan B. Anthony did attend a lot of the spiritualist camps to lecture on women's suffrages, free thinking. Not saying she was necessarily a spiritualist, but she attended and lectured at a lot of these camps because it was a group of free thinkers. In 1903, they became the City of Lights, and then 1906, the Lilydale Assembly, which it is today. And we talked about the Fox Cottage being brought there until it burned down. Susan B. Anthony was a regular there. Lilydale would bring, currently everything's virtual like a lot of other churches, but in the past they would bring in James Van Praagh, a lot of the big names, to bring in people into the auditorium. I don't think James Van Praagh's been there for a while. They bring in the ghost hunting tours, the national television show. They bring in a lot of big names every season. And so they needed a place to come during the winter months. So we talked about George Colby being one of the first trustees of the association. And George Colby's spirit guide brought him to Central Florida, to this location. And George Colby bought a chunk of property. Not sure how many of the original acres it was. Visualize with me. This is 35 acres, about 35, 40 acres. And this property stretched all the way over to Kickliter?
It was 77 and 44 100ths acres.
77 and
44
100ths of an acre. Yeah. And it stretched all the way to the lake, Lake Colby. Lake Colby? Colby Lake.
That's Lake Colby.
Yeah, Lake Colby. And have you ever been over to the Lake Colby to where they built the park? Any of you been there?
Yes.
It's nice because they show you where his house used to be. George Colby's house. I guess it burned down years ago, but you can still see where the house is. They have the plaque up saying where the house used to be. So it's a nice tour if you're out here and you want to go explore that. They do give you some of the history of the spiritualism. But he deeded property to the camp. Cassadaga was incorporated in 1894. George Colby from Pike, New York, he was a trance medium. He came down, it said he started coming down in 1875 to this area. And his spirit guide, Seneca, thank you, Seneca, like the street. Seneca guided him down here because there was a stream, spring, thank you, spring. And he came down here for his health. And in 1895, it says he deeded 35 acres to the association. Any questions about camps? There's some more camps I'd like to go over with you. Okay, so mentioned the first camp meeting was held in 1866 in Malden, Massachusetts, and the permanently established one in 1867 in Cape Cod. 1877 Onset Bay Grove Camp, Onset, Massachusetts. Let me go over some camps with you. I love going over the camp names and years because of the names. The names just I love. Starting in 1850s, Edna Spiritualist Camp started meeting in Maine, and they incorporated in 1890. Have you been to Edna?
Yes, I have.
What's Edna like?
It's a lot like this camp, but just more friendlier.
I mean, they have the houses. They have the houses just set up just like we do, correct?
Yeah, houses, the church, the apartment buildings over there look a lot like our apartment buildings, Harmony and Brigham. They look a lot like our houses that are actually built here.
Okay. In 1874, Wonowoke Spiritualist Camp in Wisconsin. 1874, the Western Wisconsin Camp Association. 1879, Madison Spiritualist Camp in Maine.
Madison.
You been to Madison?
Yes, I have.
What is Madison like?
Madison was a lot bigger than this camp. It had an opera hall, restaurants, hotels. The camp has sold itself off. Now there's only one little small house that actually is the spiritualist, and the rest has all been sold off. Private ownership.
Oh, wow. Okay. 1881, Sunset Spiritualist Camp in Kansas. 1881, the Sun Spiritualist Camp in Arizona. 1882, Temple Heights Spiritualist Camp in Maine.
The Temple Heights.
What's Temple Heights like? Same?
Very fancy homes, and right overlooking the bay. It sits up on a bluff. And that place has been sold off too, except for the lodge and the church.
Oh, okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
When a spiritual church, like Mr. Gates said, is sold off, where does the money go?
Good question.
After.
Depending on who owns the land. Now,
If this camp was sold off, where would the money go?
it should go into the spiritualist checking account. Yes.
The money would actually go into an account because the whole camp would not be sold off. You still have a couple of buildings left here actually as the association. So you would have, just like every other camp has a small building, that money would be put into an account to run that building or that part of the organization that still survives. So we don't get a windfall.
No. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the legal wording is it could be sold to another organization, 501c3 or religious organization, but the money should go into an account for whoever owns the property.
Well, like, say the church owns 5 buildings and individuals such as my wife own the other 5 buildings,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like me and my wife own a house down here.
Yes, sir.
If we sold it, we would get the money, right? No?
No, so you don't.
We would, right?
The
If
camp-
sold that house, we would get the money. It's our house. But if you sold this building, you would get the money. Who is you?
The association would get it. The
And,
camp-
okay, then if there's no more Cassadaga Church,
There'd always be a spiritualist church here, so unless the spiritualist church got sold off to another 501c, then the money from this organization would then revert into that account for the 501c who actually took over it.
So John, legally, the property, all the dirt is owned by the association. You own the house sitting on top of the dirt. You don't own anything underneath the house.
Legally, the association will get the money. Illegally, you can give it to me.
no, I mean, I mean, eventually, that money's gonna actually materialize as cash somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, that's the bottom line as far as I understand things. I try to keep things very, plain and normal. That money's gonna have to materialize somewhere, and who gets to use it?
Well, remember the association's still active. It's still a corporation. Then the board of trustees, and hopefully with the input of the membership, would decide what would happen at that point.
I'm not exactly pertaining it to this camp. I'm saying that
Right.
camp that you was just talking about before that guy vanished. Where did that
Mississippi.
money go to?
Well-
Did the three top guys split the money and go
No.
their separate ways? What?
According to the article, if you're talking about the Mississippi church that I was talking about last week, the national organization owned it and just let it go. They let it go back.
And where'd the money go?
It didn't go anywhere because they just let it go. Now I believe the county or the city in that particular case took control over it, and they're selling it. That was just that particular incident. Yes, Reverend Gates, and I'll come back up.
Well, the question was like Temple Heights, some of these places. Temple Heights was actually owned by National. So National actually sold, the property got sold off, but Temple Heights Association is still in place. So National runs Temple Heights, so the money stays within National and the Temple Heights Association, Spiritual Association. So the money stays there, stays in the
Right.
account. And anything owned by National, if the church goes out of business and it's owned by National and it's sold, the money goes back up to Lilly and it goes back up to National headquarters.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just wanted to say that I've been to Onset, and that is kind of like a little church in the middle of a little New England community. But at one point, historically, apparently, there's a lovely little bluff going up the hill from the water, and that used to be camps and tents and all that, from what I understand.
It was the wigwam, you still have the wigwam there. He's probably gonna announce all this stuff anyway, so.
Oh, okay.
Well, after Temple Heights was 1822, Pine Grove Spiritualist Camp, and these are camps that are still in existence. Not necessarily go into every one who's no longer in existence. Pine Grove Spiritualist Camp in Connecticut, Camp Chesterfield in Indiana. I've been to Camp Chesterfield. What impressed me about Camp Chesterfield, and not comparing it to any other spiritualist church, is everything is manicured, everything is up to date, everything looks nice. They don't allow the buildings at that time when I went to look like they were decaying. Everything was kept up. A lot of their museum has a lot of the historical spiritualism artifacts also. Have you been there, Louis?
Yes, I have.
It's an interesting little community. You're pulling down a residential road, and then it dead ends at the camp. So that's where they'll put up their gate. So during the season, it's only one way in, one way out. Here, we don't have the gate where we can really put up to stop the flow of traffic. Lilydale has that one entrance, one exit also. 1893 would be the Onset Wigwam Spiritualist Camp in Maine. 1896 is Harmony Grove in California. 1899, my favorite name, Snowflake. Snowflake Spiritualist Camp. Guess where Snowflake is? Michigan. Michigan. So, those are 12 of the ones that I could find that are still in existence. I'm sure there are more. Most likely there are some that are probably now independent, not part of national. like we are independent. We're no longer part of the national organization. So any questions about the camp? I answered your question before you came in about the UK spiritualists.
Oh, yeah.
So the national, they were starting to meet in 1853 when Leah went over with her sisters. I asked the Potts brothers that lecture here, and they're saying a lot of momentum was building when the Fox sisters went over. Leah Fox was very instrumental in getting that going. So 1853 they started, and they incorporated in 1901, Spiritualist Nationalist Union. So I had that for you. What I didn't say is also the Spiritualist National Union owns the Arthur Findlay College. Have you been to Arthur Findlay, Reverend Gates?
No.
Not yet. 36-acre estate in Stansted. The estate was built in 1871. The current estate was built in 1871. Finished in 1876, and Arthur Findlay was the last owner, and he deeded it over to the Spiritualist Nationalist Union. So now there's a college. If you want to go over and study in the UK, you can study at the Arthur Findlay College. I know some of our mediums have been there. I know Maida's been there. Reverend Maida Jones, Reverend Van Cox has been there. That's all I know of. So any questions about the camps? So we've come a long way. This month we talked about spiritualism, introduction to spiritualism, modern spiritualism. Next month we're going to take the month and talk about mediumship. Are you enjoying the block? Everyone's, yes. You're enjoying having us talk about one subject for the whole entire month. If that's something you would like, we will continue to do that. Next month will be mediumship. We will have 2 teachers come in besides myself, Reverend Van Cott and also the Reverend Judy Cooper. They're going to come in and talk about their journey to becoming a medium. Yes, John?
What about spiritualism with the Native Indians here in America? Didn't they have something to do with it?
There's a lot of photos of Native Americans being part of a lot of the original spiritualist churches. I'm not saying they were spiritualist, but they did. There are pictures of them participating. I mean, they have their own Native American ways. I wouldn't call them spiritualist.
I thought they would add a lot to it, is what I'm thinking.
What way are you thinking?
I don't know, with their ceremonies, with their beliefs, with their strength.
As spiritualism's developed, we were talking about this earlier, you're exposed to a culture, something you like, you participate in it. When you come back to where you normally are, like if you're here in Central Florida, you're always going to bring back a piece of something that you studied, and you're going to incorporate it into your daily life. So yes, they were participants and people did learn a lot from them, but I can't say where we've blended, and unless someone can show me so I can see it visually, how we've blended our beliefs. Reverend Gates?
The only place that I know that we spiritualists blended their beliefs was at the Wigwam up in Massachusetts. So if you go in the Wigwam, it's studied a lot for Indian guides, Indian lore, Indian spiritualists. So it's a lot of history there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only spiritualist camp I saw that they actually had the building for the Wigwam. It was this beautiful energy as far as Indian had Indians here. I have pictures, I have antique pictures of the camp with Native Americans that were on this property when George Colby came here. So, and they became part of, they were living on the property with George Colby. So there were Indians living here when George Colby came here to this property.
So it was blended in.
They kind of worked here and were around, but I don't know if they were actually majorly part of the church. Because when George Colby bought the property, the other people actually came in with George Colby, like the Webster Hotel. Ann Stevens bought her house for the bed and breakfast. The Webster Hotel went up behind that. So George Colby's property didn't go all the way to Marion Street. It did not go all the way over to Kicklighter. It stopped at a position and went over that way. That's actually owned by Volusia County now. So a lot of the property was actually gifted to Volusia County as a state park now. So.
Yeah, I've seen some of the historical photos at Lilydale that has the Native Americans participating in whatever
Thing they did,
Whatever they-
were there, they had pictures of them.
Any other questions?
So you said there were 12 still open?
12 is what I wrote down.
Okay,
Of the list that I found on the internet,
okay.
those were the 12. I'm sure there's more. I'm absolutely sure there's more. Yes, Louis.
There's actually 34 still in existence.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's a lot
Most of
more
them
I
are
missed.
independent. So the ones that you don't see are independent, like Cassadaga. A lot of the ones are still independent. There's quite a few out west, extremely quite a few out west that are independent. They are part of an organization.
Is Onset independent?
Onset is independent. They're
Okay.
independent. So
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Then we're going to end our Lyceum for today. There is no test. I promise you. No test. We're just here to help you understand where we are and where we've came from. So without further ado, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.